Hey, welcome back to Terraverse TV. My name is John Altarelli. I'm going to be your host today. I've got my wonderful producer, Jenna, with us today, and we're going to talk about a topic that was requested by one of the viewers. They've asked us to do a little bit about the 25th Amendment. Now, it's sort of maybe a little bit more apropos today after the attempted assassination of former President Donald Trump recently. But it's been a topic of conversation now throughout both Trump's administration and somewhat during Biden's administration. So we'll get right to it. Now, if you like the content, please subscribe, hit the like button, hit the bell, and send us your comments and make requests for other topics that you would like us to cover. I'm going to try to do my best on this one. I've done some research to make sure I'm able to talk somewhat intelligently about it. Again, I don't claim to be a constitutional scholar, but I am an experienced 30-plus year lawyer and a bit of a constitutional, fan. So I've been tracking cases my entire life, or at least my entire legal career, and I do love to keep on top of the Supreme Court rulings, and particularly our Constitution. It's so important for our country, and it's so important for people to really understand what the law is and the reasons behind them. The 25th Amendment is probably a fairly straightforward one to talk about. It's really about the succession in the event that the president is incapacitated or dies in office. And it was never really clarified in the Constitution. It only really went as far as what happens if the president dies and the vice president takes over. It didn't really clarify what inability means. And therefore, over the years, going back as far as I think, in the 1841 with William Henry Harrison, his death, we had hit the first shift over to the vice president, and then later on in the 20th century we had numerous presidents that suffered some type of illness or they were debilitated. You had Wilson, Eisenhower, Reagan. There's been many presidents that had operations. Even Bush, by the way, had operations where they were under sedation, and that at that point they obviously could not discharge the duties of the president. And the 25th Amendment provided for a full succession plan, even past the vice president, in case the vice president got killed at the same time or right thereafter. So they had a whole succession plan of who it goes to next, Senate pro tem, and there's all these rules. And that's all laid out in there. And then there's this fourth section. Okay, so let me just go over the sections real quick. There's four sections. I got them up on the screen for you. So the first one just clarifies that the president removed for office dies or resigns, the vice president becomes president. That's pretty straightforward. The second one provides for a new vice president is appointed by the president, subject to confirmation of majority of both the houses of Congress. Okay, if the vice president is removed or is vacant. And then the section 3, which is the only one that's been actually invoked by a president, is when the president is voluntarily decides that he or she is unable to discharge the duties. They can go to the Senate pro tem and they can make a declaration that they're going to have the vice president step in. It can be on a temporary basis. It could be on a permanent basis. It depends on the situation. And then again, if the president wants to come back into office, he has to again go back to the Senate and the Speaker and declare again that he's prepared to go back and resume the duties. It's the fourth section is the one that's been the controversial one lately. It's never been invoked. There's no cases on this. So we really won't know, what kind of challenges that people could put forth. But what the fourth one says, if the vice president and a majority of the principal officers of the executive departments, so I guess we're talking about the cabinet, declare that the president is unable to discharge the powers and duties of the office, the vice president will immediately become the acting president. If the president disputes this declaration, Congress must decide the issue, and a 2/3 vote in both houses is required to confirm the president's inability. Otherwise, the president resumes in office. So there's a way for the president who doesn't agree with the vice president and his cabinet to get him, to get at least a hearing in front of both houses, and then it's going to be up to the Congress to decide. And then, of course, I suppose at that point you could have a Supreme Court challenge to that even. There's always, you always assume that if the president was really intransigent about leaving, that he or she would try to appeal to the Supreme Court, and it would be interesting to see how the Supreme Court would rule, since these are pretty specific provisions and they seem to have pretty straightforward rules. I have a hard time trying to figure out how you could argue against it, because it doesn't say that they have to prove disability. They just have to say if these people say he is, that's it. It's their judgment, and we have to trust their judgment. So President Reagan invoked it when he had colon cancer. George H.W. Bush had it when he had surgery. W. Bush invoked it twice. So it's been invoked before, where they knew they were going to be out of commission, and they've had the vice president step in. Now, from that point, over the Trump administration, if you were following the news during that period, we've had numerous calls from the Democrats to invoke the 25th Amendment, Section 4, to remove Trump. And particularly after January 6th and other times, or when he had COVID, I think when he had COVID, once they were going to remove him, which is pretty bizarre, because I think Biden had COVID more than once. Everyone's had COVID. I had it 3 times, 4 times, I don't even know. But it was very bizarre that the left was calling for it, because the left can't get it done. Okay, it has to come from the right. Whatever president's in office, it has to come from that party to remove him. It's not up for the other party to remove him, which, thank God, is the case, because they would try to use it every single time. They would have used it against Trump every day. They've impeached him, and they're going to use every tool they can to get him out. And I think the right might do the same thing. Hopefully they won't. But they have if that's the way it goes, that's what's going to happen. So it has to come from your own party. So it was really bizarre that Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, who else was in there? There's a bunch of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ilhan Omar, all of them were on the stump back in the day trying to get Trump removed under the 25th Amendment, which is again kind of absurd, kind of bizarre, kind of stupid, but they did. Now the funny thing is. Now they've got the same issue on their side, and it's actually more of an acute issue. I think there are a lot of people on the Democratic side. Forget about what the Republicans think. The Republicans, I will take them as being biased, so we won't use what Republicans think about Joe, or even what I think about Joe. I think he's got some issues. I don't know enough to say that he's impaired to the point where he can't discharge the duties of his office. I think doctors should look at him and be very careful about the analysis. But frankly, I think Joe himself has enough cognitive ability to decide for himself. I would think. He doesn't look like he's completely out to lunch, where he doesn't even know where he is or what he's doing. I've seen people at that point, at that age. I remember when my parents got to the end of their life, they were not able to converse. They didn't know who we were. So I know there's a point at which, then you're definitely not able to do it. I don't think he's there. He is definitely in decline, and I don't see him surviving another 4 years in that job. I mean, my God, that job is so hard with his cognitive ability going down and down and down. And frankly, if I were him, there's no way I would try to go another 4 years knowing the shape that he's in. I don't think I would do it even myself at my age now, but that's up to him to decide. And if the Democrats want to remove him, I think they'd have a good argument. I think that they can go in there, and if the vice president and enough of the people in the cabinet decide they want to remove him, I suspect they would get there. I don't know why they'd do that, although you never know. They may get so desperate now over this fact that he may have zero chance of winning now. They may think that. I don't know. This assassination attempt certainly did not help. But I would be surprised if this ever gets invoked. I think it will only get invoked if the president's sort of in a coma, right? So he's in the hospital, you know what I mean, Jen? And he can't speak for himself. At that point, I certainly think that this would be appropriate, okay? I doubt if it would be appropriate if the guy is still willing to, if he can still talk and and get around, and his doctors are not suggesting that he needs to step down. Then I don't think they should invoke it. I think it's quite a extraordinary remedy, and I don't think it was intended for situations where people just didn't think he could win the election, so therefore we're going to take him out. I think it really was intended to cover those circumstances where, by the way, all other presidents that had invoked it did it on their own. They didn't need to be told. They knew where they were incapacitated. They knew where they were going to be in the hospital, and they invoked it on their own, which is the correct thing for a president to do. And that's why I hope if Joe gets to the point where he feels like that, I don't want him to invoke the 25th Amendment.
Can only the president, you're saying the president can only invoke it, or you're saying people can invoke it upon him?
No, yeah, the president can invoke it.
Okay.
And the vice president and the cabinet of his vice president and cabinet can invoke it as well.
Okay.
He can dispute it, but they can do it. No, you can get removed by your own people. And like I said, I don't think it was intended for this type of situation, although if he continues to decline to the point where he really isn't making any sense and he is not being rational to the point that people really fear that, then I think they may have to invoke it.
You would think that, or me, someone that's not as knowledgeable about the law as you are, that after the debate and how the left turned on their own people, you would think that this maybe would have already been happening, or that's what I would like. After hearing you speak, I'm like, well, why didn't this already get started? Because I mean, people on the left were really like crapping on Biden. It wasn't nice. They were being really mean. So,
well, one of the reasons why I hope, again, I always give people credit for being, somewhat rational, even if they're politically aligned one way or the other. I do believe that somebody there is an adult and thinks about these things. It would be very embarrassing, right, to remove your president forcibly, effectively. This is a coup, effectively. You're going to remove him against his will, okay? That is an extraordinary remedy. It's an extraordinary thing to do. And I would only do it if I were on either side of the house, whatever president was in office, is if there was no doubt that it was dangerous to continue to have the president serve in the capacity. And at that point, and if you could not convince him, right, then I would do it. Normally, right, you would think you would be able to convince the president, the inner circle of people, his most trusted advisors, and his family, by the way. That's really important. His family needs to be part of it. His wife should be in there telling him that it's time to go. And apparently she's not. I don't know her motivations. And I know the motivations of the people in the party. They don't want to do that. It would be really almost it's almost as bad as the outcome, right? So I don't think you want to do it, and you don't ever take it lightly. I think you would only do it when you really saw that there was a danger to the country. And I'm not sure that they're there yet. I think they're more concerned the fact that they can't win the election, which is a different issue. Okay, that's not the reason to get someone out of office. It's because he can't serve in the capacity of the office. That's what this constitutional amendment was all about. It wasn't that it was, we don't like the president, he wants to run, and we don't want him to run, so we're going to kick him out. That's what's happening here. And yes, there is a cognitive issue here, and yes, they could quite rightly be correct on the fact that he needs to step down. He may very well be in that position. I don't know. But it seems to me if he was in that position, that his family, his advisors, and his doctor would be able to convince him to step down, and they would never have to do this. So it's quite embarrassing that the Democratic Party is in a situation where they can't convince him, and they may ultimately invoke it. I don't know. I think it's unlikely, but it's tragic that they even talk about that, because that should never come up. It really should never come up. I hope this is never invoked on a president, against a president, unless he's in a coma and there's no, they have to do it just to get the procedures going. Other than that, I would always think that the president who was in that situation with his family, his doctors, his advisors, they would be able to say, hey, it's time, step down. Because that's what a president, who has, real, morality and ethics would do. If you can't do the job, please step down. You don't need to stay in there and run another term. And particularly at his age, he doesn't need to do another term anyway. But in any event, I don't think this will ever be invoked. I hope it never gets invoked.
Yeah.
And I hope that that all presidents that are faced with the situation that President Biden's faced with, get good advice from their family, from their doctors, from their advisors. And unfortunately, the way it was with the Democrats, they propped him up for months. If they had probably started talking about this a year ago with him, maybe they would have him out now. But they didn't. They denied when it was obvious to everyone that he was struggling. And now, at the last second, to sort of pull the rug on him, I think that's probably why he's digging his heels in. I kind of don't blame him a little bit, although, if he really cared about the country and his party, right, I think he would do the right thing. But apparently, that's not happening yet. We'll see. I think the left's going to do some stuff. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens. If I was to be a betting person, I would say he will step down on his own at some point before
For the election?
Before the election. Yeah, I do. And I think for a variety of reasons. One, I think his health is really declining, okay? And I think he's going to start to really feel that. And I think at some point, even his family's going to sort of say, hey, we got to do something here. And then I think the pressure from the party to win on an election is going to be so heavy. You get, when George Clooney comes out, boy, you got problems, right? When he comes out and says, you got to go, that's extraordinary, right? So I think the pressure from the party is going to be too much to bear, and I think they'll get him to resign. That's my guess. We'll see what happens. I'm just sort of playing out what I think a rational end game would be on this, because I don't see him running a good campaign. I don't think in his shape he can beat Trump, particularly after Trump now is becoming somewhat of a hero with the assassination attempt. And I think the way the left is going to go about trying to spin this is going to hurt themselves. I really do. I think this whole notion of trying to blame the Republicans for the failed assassination attempt is going to actually backfire worse than some of the other things that they've done. So we'll see, Jen. I mean, what do you think? I mean, do you have any observation on whether you think he may step down or be removed, either one?
Well, I'm not. I saw this video about after one of Biden's press conferences, how his wife was like, "You did so good." She really. It was almost as if she was like talking to a child, like in a way, and. My mind, I like to always go the psychological route. I'm like, I would see why she would, be telling her husband that he's, doing a good job, like in the sense of like, if my husband was ever like, losing it, or I wouldn't be wanting to double down on that and tell him like, you sound crazy, or I don't know, like you don't want to make them feel bad, right? So I guess like I wouldn't want to make him feel bad. However, I don't know if I said this to you yet, but I think the whole thing truly is elder abuse. I really do, in a way, because he clearly, regardless, like even with his mind, like I think his body isn't really with it. Like, what is his exact age? Do you know?
He's 81.
Oh my, bless him. I mean, like that's amazing. That is so. Some people don't even live. I mean, that's old, right? Like
he's 2 years or 3 years above the life expectancy in America.
No, it's and that's incredible. That's a gift. I mean, he should be relaxing. Mm-hmm. Like that's just what I'm like. Aren't you tired? I mean, but he also clearly, I heard another. He was speaking to someone. Can't remember who the interviewer was, but he was saying how much he loves politics. I mean, he loves this.
It's been his whole life,
it's like,
right?
yeah. So it's kind of, I feel like. I feel torn, because also if someone loves something so much and they are getting to the end of their life, I get how maybe his wife is trying to help him do this, that something he really loves, because obviously they love each other. So so in that essence, I'm like, I don't know if people are forcing him or not. I'm not really sure about that. Just because when I feel like his wife seems very loving to him, but I also am not sure. Sometimes we're trying to do the right things for the people we love, and it's not ultimately the right choice. So I don't know. Do I think he's going to step down before the election by his own voice and his own doing? I don't think so. I feel like people would they would try to get someone else in there, but I don't know if he would. I don't know if he wants to step down. I mean,
there's no way to get anybody in there unless they either invoke the 25th Amendment or he steps down voluntarily.
Why were people saying that though? Or that's what I was hearing. Like,
they can't replace him.
The Democratic Party is getting ready to get someone else. Why was that being spoken?
I think they might try. Well, because there's always this theories that they can go to the convention and somehow the delegates are going to vote the other way. I don't know how that works. I don't think it can happen. I don't think it can happen. I guess maybe it could. I don't know. I have to look into it. I don't think it can. I think you're bound to to go along with the primaries. If you won a state, you get the delegates. I don't know. I find it hard that they were going to be able to do a coup other than through the 25th Amendment or get him to voluntarily step down. And I think they needed to voluntarily step down. Back to your elder abuse. I think that's a fair thing to say. I do see that the way they talk to him, it's like an infant.
They do.
I recall, my father was disabled, so he was in bad shape for a long time. He died at 84. My mother died at 84, and the last few years of their life was, they were just not there. And my father was, my mother took care of my father, and then
mentally not there. Or?
Yeah.
Okay. No. Sometimes
and physically, my father was so weak. I mean, he was in a wheelchair for years. I used to have to, and we didn't have an elevator in my house. I remember when I came back from law school, I moved in the house with my parents. I used to drive all the way to New York from Derby because I needed to be with him. And I used to have to carry him up the stairs on my back, because we didn't have an elevator, and so I remember, how bad it was. And I remember my mother, my father was incontinent, she had to clean him all the time. It was tough. They had to feed him. And then when my mother got sick, my sisters stepped in and helped her until at some point, she had to go to hospice. That's kind of the way people end these days, in hospice on a drip or something. And it's really tragic. But the decline, it didn't happen overnight. It happens over a period of 2 to 3 years.
Right.
And it gets worse and worse and worse, and you can see it coming. And, you do everything you can. And a lot of times, you kind of push your parents past the point of where they even want to be alive. I remember I was so mad at my mother, when she died. I was so mad. I kept saying, why did you didn't have to, It was my stupid take on it. I was just so attached to my mother that I didn't want to see her go. And I was mad at her. I couldn't believe I was actually mad, that she died, and because she didn't have a specific illness. She was just old, and she just gave up, and I get it. And I'm going to do the same. I now look at myself and say, I'm going out just like that.
Oh my God, I hate when you say that.
No, but I know, Jenna.
No, I know, but I'm
you're
just like
you're just not going to want to do it anymore. It's a tough struggle to get through the day. My mother was done with it, and I didn't internalize it then. I always regretted the fact that I was mad at her, So, but watching people go through that and watching Joe. I mean, I see him. I see my parents. I do. I mean, it really troubles me because I see the signs. It all is so obvious to me, and it's got to be obvious to anyone else that's gone through it with their parents or their grandparents who were right there. I mean, I was right there with my parents right to the end, So I saw every bit of it. I stayed with them, and it's not good. And I think his wife needs to sort of step up and really be honest about what his situation is. And if it's not that bad, then great. Then I support her 100%. But if it is as bad as it looks to the outside world, then she's not doing him a service. And to be in that job in particular. Now, like I said, I blame the Dems the most. We got another minute. I'm going to wrap it up. But I blame them the most because they were propping him up, and he was their guy until the polls changed, right? They didn't change because he changed. Joe was already where he was. I mean, it's probably gotten a little worse, but I don't think it was that much worse. They've been hiding him a long time.
Yeah.
Okay. By the way, they did the same thing with Reagan at the end of his term, but he wasn't going to run again. They just figured he's got another year, we'll just hide him for his last year. Clearly, Reagan was done, the last year of his term too, and we all know that. But he didn't do anything, and everyone sort of made a plan. As long as he doesn't die, we're not going to say anything about it, and he's done it when he's done, and that'll be that. And they let him go out with sort of some kind of grace and dignity, right? This is a different situation. If this was the end of his term and he wasn't going to run again, I'd make sure you stayed in for the rest of his term. Of course you would, right? You do whatever you got to do to support him right to the very end. But because he wants to run again 4 more years in the situation that he's in, that's bizarre, and I don't know why anyone in his family or anyone in his circle think that that's a smart move.
Yeah.
So that's where I'm at. But again, I blame the Democrats because until the polls turned, they were going to prop him up like, Weekend at Bernie's. They literally were.
Yep.
And now they're going to have to deal with the fact that they did that because I think it's hard to turn back from that. It really is. Anyway, that's my take. I feel bad about President Biden. I wish him the best. I hope, he stays healthy as long as he can. I will have no ill will towards President Biden, and I just think the Democrats should be more respectful of him. Same thing for former President Trump. I'm glad he didn't get killed. I hope he runs a better campaign like we talked about before, Jen. I think I saw a little change in his look.
Yeah.
Hopefully he realized that he got a miracle, right? And that miracle, that miracle hopefully will have some indelible effect on his how he goes forward over the rest of his life, including if he becomes president again. I hope he takes the grace of God, and he takes that and spreads it to the rest of the world. That's my hope for both of them.
Me too.
Okay? God
Yep.
bless. Thanks for watching. Subscribe, like, ring the bell. Tell me how much you like Jenna, and send us more topics to talk about. I don't know if we're being any useful to you or not, but we're trying our best, and we're trying to be measured about these things and trying not to to take ridiculous left or right views on this stuff.
Although I don't mind doing that.
We can do that too. All right. Take care. God bless. See you next time.